I remember the briefing like it was yesterday. We were in the middle of routine training when we got the call. The commanding officer, Donovan, assembled us quickly. As we stood there in full gear, he introduced us to a woman I had never seen before. She had an air of authority that immediately grabbed my attention. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. Instead, she dove straight into the details of our mission. A research facility in the remote mountains of Colorado had experienced a catastrophic event. Explosions, structural damage, chaos, the works. Our objective: rescue Dr. Henderson and extract any survivors. Donovan, Mason, Hunter, Grant, Reed, and I exchanged glances. This was no ordinary mission. The urgency and secrecy surrounding it set off alarms in my head. The woman provided us with night vision equipment and detailed maps of the facility. As she spoke, I couldn't help but notice the tension in her voice. She mentioned creatures, monstrous beings that were unlike anything we had faced before. This was more than a rescue mission. It was a fight for survival against unknown horrors. We geared up in silence, each of us lost in our thoughts. I thought about my team and the bond we shared. Donovan, our commanding officer, was a rock, steady and reliable. Mason, the advisor, always had a plan. Hunter, with his machine gun, was our powerhouse. Grant, the marksman, could hit a target from miles away. Reed, our corpsman, was the best medic I had ever seen. We were ready for anything, or so we thought. The helicopter ride to the facility was tense. We flew under the cover of night, the whir of the rotor blades the only sound breaking the silence. I found myself staring out into the dark, my mind racing with possibilities. What had happened at the facility? What kind of creatures were we up against? The woman's cryptic warnings echoed in my head, making it hard to focus on anything else. As we neared the mountains, the first signs of chaos came into view. Explosions lit up the night sky, and fires raged within the facility. It looked like a war zone. My heart pounded in my chest as we prepared to land. We touched down just outside the perimeter, the ground shaking from the force of another explosion. The air was thick with smoke and the acrid smell of burning metal. We disembarked quickly, securing the perimeter as instructed. People were running in all directions, panic written all over their faces. We moved in formation, weapons at the ready. The destruction was worse than I had imagined. Debris was everywhere, and the facility's once imposing structure was now a crumbling mess. We had to be careful. One wrong step, and we could find ourselves buried under rubble. Our first priority was to establish a secure zone. We set up a temporary command post and began assessing the situation. Reed and Mason tended to the injured personnel we encountered, while Donovan and I tried to make sense of the chaos. Grant and Hunter kept watch, their eyes scanning for any sign of the creatures the woman had warned us about. It wasn't long before we got our first taste of what we were up against. As we moved deeper into the facility, we heard strange noises, growls and screeches that sent chills down my spine. Grant spotted movement in the shadows, and we all froze. Out of the darkness, a creature emerged. It was unlike anything I had ever seen, twisted and monstrous, with glowing eyes that seemed to pierce through the night. We opened fire, the sound of our guns echoing through the ruins. The creature was fast, but our training kicked in. We moved as one, each of us knowing our role. Hunter's machine gun roared, and Grant's precise shots took down the creature. It fell to the ground with a final, haunting cry. We stood there, breathing heavily, the reality of our situation sinking in. This was just the beginning. The encounter left us rattled but resolute. We knew the mission was more dangerous than we had anticipated, but failure was not an option. We regrouped, checked our equipment, and pushed forward. The facility was a maze of destruction, but we navigated it with the precision of a well-oiled machine. Every corner we turned, every room we cleared, brought us closer to Dr. Henderson. As we moved, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The facility was alive with danger, and the creatures were always just out of sight, waiting for their chance to strike. The woman's words played over and over in my mind. Be prepared for anything. I steeled myself, knowing that we had to stay focused and vigilant. Our lives depended on it. We pushed deeper into the facility, our nerves frayed from the constant tension. The air was thick with smoke, making it difficult to see and even harder to breathe. Every step we took was measured and deliberate, our senses on high alert. The dim glow of our night vision goggles cast eerie shadows on the walls, turning the place into a nightmarish maze. The facility, once a hub of research and innovation, now felt like the ruins of a forgotten world. As we navigated through the wreckage, we came across injured personnel. Their faces were pale, their eyes wide with fear. Reed and Mason sprang into action, providing quick medical aid. Reed's expertise as a corpsman was invaluable, his hand steady as he patched up wounds and administered pain relief. Mason, ever the strategist, coordinated our movements, ensuring we stayed on track despite the chaos. Seeing these people, terrified and broken, only strengthened our resolve to find Dr. Henderson and get them all out. The further we went, the more evidence we found of the catastrophic event that had occurred. Equipment lay in ruins, and makeshift barricades hinted at desperate last stands against something terrifying. We moved silently, our communications limited to hand signals and the occasional whispered command. Every now and then, I caught sight of movement in the shadows, but it was always gone before I could get a clear look. The creatures were toying with us, their presence a constant, unsettling reminder of the danger we faced. In the sublevels, we encountered the true horror of the situation. The scenes of death and destruction were unlike anything I had ever seen. Bodies lay strewn across the floors, their faces frozen in expressions of terror. Blood stained the walls, and the air was thick with the stench of decay. It was clear that whatever had happened here had been swift and brutal. Grant, ever the marksman, spotted movement ahead. We all froze, our weapons trained on the shadows. Then it came, our first direct encounter with the creatures. It was a twisted, monstrous being, its eyes glowing with a malevolent light. It moved with a terrifying speed, launching itself at us with a guttural roar. We opened fire, the sound of our guns deafening in the confined space. The creature was fast, but our training took over. Hunter's machine gun blazed, and Grant's precise shots found their mark. The creature fell, but not without a fight. Its final, haunting cry echoed through the halls, a chilling reminder of the dangers lurking in the darkness. Just when we thought we had a moment to breathe, another creature attacked. This one was even more vicious, and in the chaos, it managed to grab me. I felt its claws dig into my flesh as it tried to drag me away. Fear surged through me, but I fought back with everything I had. My team responded immediately, their combined firepower overwhelming the creature. It released me with a scream, and I managed to put a bullet through its head. The encounter left us shaken, but we knew we had no choice but to press on. We regrouped and assessed our situation. We were injured, and our nerves were shot, but we had to keep moving. The facility was a labyrinth of destruction, and every step brought new challenges. We navigated through debris and collapsed corridors, always wary of another attack. The creatures were relentless, their presence a constant threat. Yet, despite the fear and the exhaustion, we pushed forward, driven by the need to complete our mission. As we moved deeper, the attacks became more frequent. The creatures seemed to sense our presence, drawn to us by some unseen force. Each encounter was a test of our skills and our resolve. Reed worked tirelessly, tending to our wounds and keeping us on our feet. Donovan's steady hand guided us through the chaos, his calm demeanor a beacon of stability in the madness. Mason's strategic mind kept us one step ahead, his plans adapting to the ever-changing situation. Finally, we reached a secure lab where we hoped to find Dr. Henderson. The door was heavily barricaded, a sign that whoever was inside had taken extreme measures to stay safe. We worked quickly to clear the debris and gain entry. Inside, we found Dr. Henderson, alive but terrified. The relief in his eyes when he saw us was palpable. He was injured but coherent, and he began to explain the situation. The creatures, he said, were the result of a failed experiment, an attempt to enhance human abilities gone horribly wrong. With Dr. Henderson in tow, we had to make our way back to the surface. The facility was a death trap, and we knew the journey would be perilous. But we had no choice. Our mission was clear: get Dr. Henderson and any survivors out alive. The horrors we had faced so far were just the beginning, and as we prepared to leave the lab, I knew we were in for the fight of our lives. The moment we found Dr. Henderson, I felt a surge of relief mixed with renewed urgency. He was our primary objective, and with him alive, our mission had purpose again. But getting him out was going to be a whole new challenge. His face was pale, his eyes wide with fear, and his clothes were torn and blood-stained. He was clearly shaken, but there was a spark of determination in his eyes. We had to move fast. The longer we stayed, the more vulnerable we became. We gathered around Dr. Henderson, listening as he explained the nature of the creatures. They were the result of an experiment meant to enhance human abilities, but something had gone terribly wrong. The creatures were aggressive, unpredictable, and deadly. Knowing what we were up against didn't make it any easier, but it helped us understand the stakes. We formulated a plan to get Dr. Henderson out, relying on our training and each other to navigate the treacherous facility. As we moved, the facility seemed to close in around us. The once sterile corridors were now twisted and broken, debris littering our path. The air was thick with smoke and the stench of death. Every corner we turned presented new dangers. Mason led the way, his eyes scanning for threats, while Grant covered our rear. Hunter and I flanked Dr. Henderson, ready to protect him at all costs. Reed stayed close, ready to provide medical aid if needed. We hadn't gone far before we encountered another group of creatures. They appeared out of nowhere, their eyes glowing in the darkness. The fight was brutal. Hunter's machine gun roared to life, cutting down the first wave, but more kept coming. Grant's precision shots were invaluable, taking down creatures with lethal efficiency. Mason directed our movements, keeping us from being overwhelmed. Dr. Henderson stayed low, his face a mask of fear, but his actions controlled. We fought hard, and eventually, the creatures fell. But the cost was high. We were battered and bruised, our nerves frayed. The encounters with the creatures took their toll on all of us. I could see the strain in my team's eyes. We were all pushing our limits, both physically and mentally. Every moment was a fight for survival, and it was wearing us down. Reed worked tirelessly, tending to our wounds and keeping us on our feet. His calm presence was a source of strength, but even he was beginning to show signs of exhaustion. We had to keep moving. Stopping was not an option. Navigating through the damaged facility was like moving through a nightmare. Fires burned unchecked, casting flickering shadows that played tricks on our minds. The sounds of distant explosions and collapsing structures were a constant reminder of the danger we were in. The creatures seemed to be everywhere, their growls and screeches echoing through the halls. We moved as quickly and quietly as we could, avoiding unnecessary confrontations and conserving our strength for when it was needed most. Finally, we reached a section of the facility that seemed relatively intact. It was a welcome reprieve from the chaos, but we knew it wouldn't last. We took a moment to catch our breath and reassess our situation. Dr. Henderson provided us with more information about the layout of the facility and potential escape routes. His knowledge was invaluable, but it also painted a grim picture. The way out was long and fraught with danger. We had no choice but to press on. As we moved towards the exit, the attacks became more frequent and intense. The creatures were relentless, as if they knew we were close to escaping. Each encounter was a desperate struggle. We used every bit of our training and experience to survive. Hunter and Grant were our heavy hitters, their firepower keeping the creatures at bay. Mason's tactical acumen guided us through the chaos, while Reed's medical skills kept us in the fight. Dr. Henderson, though not a soldier, proved his worth by staying calm and following our lead. The final leg of our journey was the most harrowing. We were close to the surface, but the creatures seemed to know it too. They came at us in waves, each attack more ferocious than the last. We fought with everything we had, our bodies pushed to the brink of exhaustion. The facility around us continued to collapse, adding to the chaos. Every step forward was a battle, but we refused to give up. The thought of failure was not an option. We had come too far to turn back now. In the end, we emerged battered but victorious. We reached the surface, the night sky a welcome sight after the claustrophobic darkness of the facility. We could hear the distant hum of our extraction helicopter approaching. We had survived, but the cost had been high. As we waited for extraction, I looked at my team and felt a deep sense of pride and gratitude. We had faced unimaginable horrors and come out the other side. But I knew this was just the beginning. The creatures were still out there, and our fight was far from over. The surface seemed like a distant memory as we plunged back into the facility's depths, now burdened with the added responsibility of protecting Dr. Henderson. Every step we took was fraught with peril, and the creatures seemed more relentless than ever. The facility's lower levels were a labyrinth of destruction, filled with obstacles that slowed our progress and heightened the danger. We had to be resourceful to survive. Mason, always the strategist, devised makeshift barricades and traps to slow the creatures' advance. We used overturned tables, collapsed walls, and anything else we could find to create choke points. It wasn't perfect, but it bought us precious time. Hunter's machine gun was our first line of defense, his steady stream of bullets keeping the creatures at bay. Grant's sharpshooting was critical, picking off anything that got too close. But the strain was evident. Reed worked tirelessly to patch up our wounds, his medical supplies dwindling with each encounter. His calm demeanor was a lifeline, keeping us grounded in the face of overwhelming odds. I could feel the psychological toll mounting. Every gruesome sight, every near-death experience, weighed heavily on us. I struggled with the responsibility of leading my team through this nightmare, knowing that one mistake could mean the end for all of us. We pressed on, navigating through the wreckage with a grim determination. The facility seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy, the very walls echoing with the sounds of distant growls and the creak of settling debris. Each turn was a gamble, and the creatures were never far behind. The darkness and smoke made it difficult to see, and our night vision equipment could only do so much. Every shadow was a potential threat, every noise a warning. Donovan's voice crackled through our earpieces, providing critical guidance. From his vantage point with the Predator drone, he could see the bigger picture, steering us away from the worst of the dangers. His calm, authoritative tone was a beacon in the chaos, reminding us that we were not alone in this fight. His updates were invaluable, but they also painted a dire picture. The facility was collapsing faster than we could navigate it, and the creatures were multiplying. As we moved closer to the surface, the attacks intensified. The creatures were more aggressive, their tactics more coordinated. It was as if they sensed our desperation and were determined to prevent our escape. Each battle was more brutal than the last. We fought with everything we had, our training and instincts the only things keeping us alive. The sounds of gunfire, screams, and the creatures' roars filled the air, creating a cacophony of terror. One particularly fierce encounter nearly ended us. A massive explosion somewhere above caused part of the facility to collapse, blocking our path and trapping us in a dead-end corridor. The creatures seized the opportunity, swarming us from all sides. It was a desperate fight for survival. Hunter's machine gun overheated, forcing him to switch to his sidearm. Grant ran out of ammunition and resorted to using his knife. Reed and I fought back to back, protecting Dr. Henderson as best we could. Mason, ever the quick thinker, found a weak spot in the wall and used a makeshift explosive to create an escape route. The blast cleared a path, but it also attracted more creatures. We were forced to run, fighting off attackers as we went. The facility seemed to be actively working against us, every turn leading to more obstacles and dangers. It was a nightmare scenario, and our bodies and minds were pushed to the brink. Finally, we saw a glimmer of hope. The corridor ahead opened up into a larger space, with a faint light indicating a way out. But the creatures were relentless, and we knew we couldn't let our guard down. With one final push, we fought our way through, each of us driven by the sheer will to survive. The light grew brighter, and the sounds of the helicopter's rotors filled the air. We were close. As we burst into the open, the sight of the extraction helicopter was a welcome relief. But the fight wasn't over. The creatures followed us out, and we had to hold them off until we could board. The helicopter's crew provided covering fire, helping to thin the ranks of our pursuers. We formed a defensive perimeter, every shot counting. The ground shook as more explosions erupted from the facility, and I knew we had to move fast. We managed to get Dr. Henderson and the rest of the team aboard, but not without cost. Hunter took a hit, a creature's claw raking across his back as he covered our retreat. Grant pulled him to safety, both of them barely making it onto the helicopter as it lifted off. The creatures swarmed below, their roars of frustration echoing in the night as we ascended. As we flew away, I looked back at the burning facility. We had survived, but the cost was high. We were battered, exhausted, and haunted by the horrors we had witnessed. The extraction was a success, but it felt like a hollow victory. The creatures were still out there, and the facility's secrets had only just begun to unravel. The fight for survival was far from over, and as we soared into the night, I couldn't shake the feeling that our real battle was just beginning. The roar of the helicopter's rotors was both a blessing and a curse as we lifted off from the hellscape below. We were safe for the moment, but I knew the journey was far from over. Hunter lay on the floor of the helicopter, bleeding from the vicious claw marks on his back. Reed worked quickly, his hands steady as he applied pressure to the wounds and administered first aid. The rest of us were exhausted, but we couldn't afford to relax just yet. The creatures' roars faded into the distance, but their presence lingered in our minds. As the helicopter soared away from the facility, I took a moment to check on my team. Mason, despite the chaos we had just endured, was already analyzing our next moves, his mind never resting. Grant sat beside Hunter, providing moral support while keeping a watchful eye on our surroundings. Dr. Henderson, visibly shaken but alive, sat huddled in a corner, his eyes reflecting the horrors he had witnessed. I approached Dr. Henderson, offering him some water and a reassuring word. He looked up at me, his expression one of profound relief mixed with lingering fear. "Thank you," he said, his voice trembling. "You saved my life." I nodded, knowing that our mission was far from over. We still had to debrief and figure out what went wrong in that facility. The creatures were a threat that couldn't be ignored, and their existence raised more questions than answers. The flight to our rendezvous point felt like an eternity. The adrenaline that had kept us going was wearing off, leaving us to contend with the physical and emotional toll of the mission. I found myself replaying the events in my mind, trying to piece together how things had spiraled so quickly. The creatures, the destruction, the desperation. It all seemed surreal, but the wounds on my body and the exhaustion in my bones were very real. When we finally landed, we were greeted by a group of unidentified individuals, their faces hidden behind masks. They moved with military precision, their demeanor cold and efficient. We were escorted from a helicopter and led to a secure facility, our weapons confiscated and our injuries assessed. The transition was jarring. One moment we were fighting for our lives, and the next we were being treated like prisoners. Separated from my team, I was taken to a sterile interrogation room. The same unidentified woman who had briefed us initially was waiting for me. She looked different now, more imposing, her eyes hard and unyielding. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Ethan, we need to know everything you saw and experienced," she said, her voice firm. I recounted the mission, detailing the creatures, the destruction, and our desperate fight for survival. As I spoke, I could see her taking mental notes, her expression never wavering. The interrogation felt like an eternity, every detail scrutinized and analyzed. The woman's questions were precise, probing for any inconsistency or hidden truth. I did my best to provide clear and honest answers, but I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more at play here than just a debrief. The organization behind this mission had secrets, and I was determined to uncover them. After what felt like hours, I was finally reunited with my team. We were given a brief moment to rest and tend to our injuries. Reed continued his tireless work, ensuring everyone was stable. Donovan shared what little information he had gathered during his own interrogation, but it was clear we were still in the dark about many aspects of the mission. The atmosphere was tense, a mix of exhaustion and suspicion. Then came the unexpected twist. The woman, accompanied by several other high-ranking officials, approached us with a proposition. She explained that our experience and skills were invaluable, and that they wanted us to join a special task force designed to combat supernatural threats. The offer was both intriguing and daunting. We had just faced horrors beyond imagination, and now we were being asked to dive back into that world. We huddled together, discussing the offer. Each of us had our own reservations and fears, but we also recognized the importance of the mission. The creatures we had encountered were just the beginning, and there was a much larger threat lurking in the shadows. Accepting the offer meant committing to a life of constant danger, but it also meant protecting countless lives from unimaginable horrors. In the end, our sense of duty won out. We agreed to join the task force, driven by a mix of curiosity, responsibility, and the desire to make a difference. As we prepared for our next mission, I couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. The road ahead was uncertain, filled with unknown dangers and hidden agendas. But I knew that with my team by my side, we could face whatever came our way. The fight for survival was far from over, and our real battle had just begun. As we navigated the crumbling corridors of the facility's sublevels, the environment became even more hostile. The air was thick with smoke and heat from the raging fires above, and every step we took seemed to amplify the danger. The walls were blackened by flames, and the floor was littered with debris from the earlier explosions. Our night vision goggles struggled to cut through the smoke and darkness, but we pressed on, driven by the urgency of our mission and the desperate need to find Dr. Henderson. The sounds of our boots crunching on broken glass and debris were barely audible over the cacophony of distant roars and the crackling of fire. We had already encountered more of those nightmarish creatures, their grotesque forms emerging from the shadows with alarming regularity. Each encounter was a brutal reminder of how dire the situation had become. Hunter's machine gunfire and Grant's sniper shots created a temporary safe zone, but we knew it was only a matter of time before the creatures regrouped and attacked again. Our path led us deeper into the facility, through areas that were clearly experimental labs or storage rooms for hazardous materials. The sight was unsettling. Broken glass, scattered vials of unknown substances, and malfunctioning equipment. It was clear that whatever had happened here was not just an accident. The facility's damaged infrastructure and the presence of these creatures pointed to something far more sinister. We made our way toward the sublevels, where the heat and smoke were almost unbearable. The facility's power seemed to be failing, the flickering lights casting eerie shadows on the walls. The intensity of the fires above and the structural collapse made every step a calculated risk. Each new room we entered was a potential trap, filled with debris or unstable structures. It was a race against time, with the threat of collapse or attack always looming. In one particularly harrowing moment, we descended into a large underground chamber that had once been a secure storage area. The chamber was now a chaotic mess of overturned shelves and scattered documents. The air was filled with the smell of burning chemicals, making it difficult to breathe. It was here that we encountered our most dangerous adversary yet, a massive creature that seemed to be a hybrid of several different forms. Its sheer size and strength were overwhelming, and it seemed to have a degree of intelligence, as it coordinated its attacks with other creatures. The battle was intense and nearly overwhelming. Hunter's gunfire seemed to have little effect on the creature's thick hide, and Grant's precision shots struggled to find weak points. The creature was relentless, pushing through our defenses and causing severe damage. It was a struggle just to keep it at bay while trying to protect Dr. Henderson and the rest of the team. Reed worked frantically to keep us all in fighting shape, but the situation was growing increasingly dire. Amid the chaos, I managed to find a tactical advantage. There was a network of overhead catwalks that had survived the damage, providing a higher vantage point. From there, I was able to direct the team and provide cover fire. The catwalks also allowed me to get a better view of the creature's movements, which helped us devise a strategy to deal with it. We coordinated our attacks, targeting the creature's vulnerable spots with a renewed focus and determination. Despite our best efforts, the creature continued to wreak havoc. It was clear that we needed to end this fight quickly. We devised a plan to create a makeshift explosive using the facility's leftover materials. Mason took charge of assembling the device while the rest of us provided cover. It was a risky move, but it was our best chance. We lured the creature into a trap and detonated the explosive, creating a massive blast that finally brought the creature down. The explosion was deafening, and the chamber was filled with debris and smoke. When the dust finally settled, we were left with a haunting silence. The creature was dead, but the damage had been severe. The chamber was barely recognizable, and the fires were spreading rapidly. We had no choice but to evacuate quickly. We retraced our steps, moving as fast as possible while keeping an eye out for any remaining threats. Emerging from the inferno, we made our way back to the surface. The facility was a smoking ruin, and the fires continued to rage unchecked. We were exhausted, battered, and emotionally drained, but we had accomplished our primary objective, rescuing Dr. Henderson. As we reached the extraction point, the helicopter was already waiting, its rotors whirring in preparation for our departure. The flight away from the facility was somber. We were safe, but the cost of the mission had been high. The facility's destruction and the creatures we had encountered were only the beginning of a much larger threat. As I looked back at the burning ruins, I couldn't shake the feeling that we had only scratched the surface of something far more terrifying. The real fight was just beginning, and we were about to be drawn deeper into a world of darkness and danger. The helicopter's whirring faded into a distant hum as we touched down at a secure location. The chaos of the facility and the fiery inferno behind us felt like a world away, but the reality of what lay ahead was far from comforting. We were exhausted, our bodies and minds battered by the ordeal. As we disembarked, I couldn't shake the weight of what we had faced and the unsettling realization that our mission had only revealed a fraction of the true threat. We were immediately escorted by a team of armed personnel to a nondescript facility nearby. The transition was abrupt, the normalcy of the new location starkly contrasting with the horrors we had just survived. Inside, the environment was sterile and controlled, a far cry from the smoldering wreckage we had left behind. Yet, despite the calm surroundings, there was a palpable tension in the air. Once inside, we were led into a stark interrogation room, its minimal furnishings adding to the cold, clinical atmosphere. The unidentified woman who had initially briefed us on the mission now awaited us, her expression inscrutable. She was flanked by a couple of others who seemed to be part of the same organization. Their demeanor was professional, but there was an undercurrent of intensity that suggested we were about to face another challenge. The woman began questioning us about the mission's specifics, details of the facility, the creatures we had encountered, and the overall situation. Her questions were precise, almost mechanical, and it was clear she was piecing together a larger puzzle. Despite the exhaustion that weighed heavily on me, I recounted the events as clearly as I could. Each question seemed to dig deeper into the nature of the threat we had faced and the significance of Dr. Henderson's role. After what felt like hours, the interrogation ended, and we were left to wait in a holding area. The silence was oppressive, the weight of the recent events settling heavily on our shoulders. I looked around at my team. Hunter, Grant, Reed, each of them showing signs of strain, but also a steely resolve. We had survived the nightmarish ordeal together, and that bond was a source of strength. The woman reappeared, her expression now softer but still serious. She informed us that, while the mission had been a success, it had exposed a much larger issue. The facility's destruction and the creatures we had encountered were part of a broader, more insidious threat. Our actions had put us on the radar of a special task force dedicated to combating supernatural threats, a task force we were now being recruited into. The offer was unexpected, and it took a moment for the gravity of her words to sink in. This was no longer a simple rescue mission, but the beginning of a new chapter in a fight against forces beyond our comprehension. The woman outlined the scope of the new mission: to investigate and neutralize similar threats, which now seemed to be part of a larger, more coordinated effort. I took a deep breath, processing the implications. The mission had revealed just how fragile the boundary between our world and the supernatural could be. The horror we had faced was not an isolated incident, but part of a disturbing pattern. Joining this task force meant committing ourselves to a battle that was far from over. It was a daunting prospect, but the alternative was to stand by and allow these threats to grow unchecked. The decision was not mine alone. I glanced at my team, each of them showing signs of resolve mixed with uncertainty. We had been through hell together, and now we faced a new kind of challenge. The choice to accept the new mission was clear. We had seen firsthand the consequences of ignoring these threats, and we had the skills and experience needed to fight back. As we left the interrogation room, we were given a briefing on our new roles and responsibilities. The task force was equipped with advanced technology and resources designed to handle supernatural phenomena. We would be trained further, provided with additional support, and integrated into a network of operatives working against similar threats worldwide. The briefing concluded with the offer to take some time to process the information and make a final decision. I knew we would need every bit of that time to come to terms with the new reality we were stepping into. As we exited the facility, the weight of our new mission pressed heavily on my shoulders. We had survived the inferno, but now we were heading into an even more complex and dangerous battlefield. In the quiet that followed, I allowed myself a moment of reflection. The facility we had left behind was a symbol of a much larger, more terrifying world. Our fight was far from over. It had only just begun.